Viradahya satam vasiyasya pumso. Vijnana Shakti Rama Samananta Shakti Rupam Vichitram Iramasam Yutam Yatome Jnana Shakti Rama Samananta Shakti Rupam Vichitram Iramasya Vivrinvatome Hari Rishishta Nigamasya Giram Visarga. Word to word. Nabi Radat. From the navel lake. Iha. In this millennium. Sataha. Lying. Ambasi. In the water. Yasya. One whose. Pumsaha, of the personality of Godhead. Vijnana, of the total universe. Shaktihi, energy. Aham, I. Asam, was born. Ananta, unlimited. Shaktihi, of the powerful. Rupam, form, vichitram, variegated. Idam, this, asya, his, vivrinvataha, manifesting, me, unto me, ma, may not, virishishta, vanish, nigamasya, of the Vedas, kiram, of the sounds, visargaha, vibration. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Abhayacharana Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. The Lord's potencies are innumerable. As He lies down in the water of devastation, I am born as the total universal energy from the navel lake in which the lotus sprouts. I am now engaged in manifesting His diverse energies in the form of the cosmic manifestation. I therefore pray that in the course of my material activities, I may not be deviated from the vibration of the Vedic hymns. Purport. Every person engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord in this material world is prone to so many material activities, and if one is not strong enough to protect himself against the onslaught of material affection, he may be diverted from the spiritual energy. In the material creation, Brahma has to create all kinds of living entities with bodies suitable to their material conditions. Brahma wants to be protected by the Lord because he has to contact many vicious living entities. An ordinary Brahmana may fall from the Brahma Tejas or the power of Brahminical excellence due to his association with many fallen, conditioned souls. Brahma, as the supermost Brahmana, is afraid of such a fall down, and therefore he prays to the Lord for protection. This is a warning for one and all in the spiritual advancement of life. Unless one is sufficiently protected by the Lord, he may fall down from his spiritual position. Therefore one has to pray constantly to the Lord for protection and the blessing to carry out one's duty. Lord Chaitanya also entrusted his missionary work to his devotees and assured them of his protection against the onslaught of material affection. The path of spiritual life is stated in the Vedas to be like the edge of a sharpened razor. A little inattentiveness may at once create havoc and bloodshed, but one who is a completely surrendered soul, always seeking protection from the Lord in the discharge of his entrusted duties, has no fear of falling into material contamination. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadate Swaparantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uta Parikamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamshta Shri Rupam Sakrachatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sachivam Sadvetam Savadutam Purichana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamshta He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Chagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Ancha Kalpadurubhashcha Kripa Sindhya Bevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, thank you for coming to Srimad Bhagavatam class. So we are concluding the prayers of Lord Brahma for creative energy. Like Kamsai Sena Prabhu yesterday mentioned that we are in this concluding section, and today actually we do reach the last of the prayers spoken by Lord Brahma. Tomorrow Maitreya Rishi will explain from his side again to Vidura. So yeah, the Prabhupada is also very nice. I find it always amazing how Prabhupada, how expertly he uses the language also in bringing points across, bringing not just across, but making them enter in our heart and across our false ego. Like here at the beginning, how he's explaining that we are prone to so many material activities, and if one is not strong enough to protect himself against the onslaught of material affection, he may be diverted from the spiritual energy. So, because it's naturally, we always think of material things, yeah, miseries are bad, but then the happiness, we are not so, we still might have the tendency of thinking, yeah, material happiness is still nice, but it comes like, it's, yeah, Prabhupada, too much. And yeah, in one Prabhupada in Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada, for example, explains how the material happiness is actually the ultimate enemy of the conditioned soul, because that's what gives one hope to further engage in material activities, rather than material miseries that no one wants, as we know, of course. So, yeah, in those last two prayers that the one we heard yesterday and the one we are reading today, I'll focus mainly on those two things that Lord Brahma is begging for, because I was thinking must have significance if that's how Lord Brahma concludes what specifically he's asking the Lord for. So yesterday he was asking the Lord that, and I pray that I not be materially affected by my works, for thus I may be able to give up the false prestige of being the creator. And in today's verse, he concludes that I may not be deviated from the vibration of the Vedic hymns. So first, about not to get affected by his works, and thus to be able to give up the false prestige of being the creator. That's basically what he's asking, because like for example, not be affected by his works, we see that later that still he does get, as the pastime goes at least, affected by his works when Krishna is telling to Uddhava about referring to how the four Kumaras once approached their father Lord Brahma, asking some philosophical question about how it can be that a pure soul gets caught up in this process of sense gratification, and then it runs automatically, and then it seems like how can it ever, no possibility of getting out like that. And then Lord Brahma, at that time actually it's mentioned that he was so caught up in his work, in his devotional service of creation, that he got affected by the mode of passion, which is the basis for creation, like for any activities, especially creating something. So, and then of course the Lord appeared himself as Hamsavatar and explained to the four Kumaras. So that's why Lord Brahma is begging the Lord here that he may not get affected by his work and thus give up the false prestige of being the creator. In other words, he is asking the Lord to help him realize that he will never ever claim credit for his devotional service, that he will never think himself the doer of activities, as Krishna many times mentions in Bhagavad Gita about this very important point. Like, there's several chapters we know karma yoga, and one basic thing is to understand that not to claim credit for what we're doing, that understanding that we are so dependent in all our activities. As he explains that in the 18th chapter, there's those 5 tours, adishtanam tata karta. So adishtanam is the place, the body in which we are situated in, on which we depend, which is given by material nature. Karta, that's ourselves, so we are one of those 5 factors. Adishtanam tata kartam, karanam cha pritak vidham, so the senses of the material body, and vividas cha pritak cheshta, the endeavor that we put, and then ultimately we depend on the super soul. How does it go? Daivam Jaivatra Panchamam. Yeah, the 5th, the Panchamam factor is the Lord himself, it's a super soul. So, and of course, and much earlier in Bhagavad Gita, the famous verse where Krishna explains that to take credit is not just foolish, but it's very foolish. Vimudatma, prakriti kriyamanani gunai karamani sarvashaha, ahankara vimudatma kartahamiti manyate. That only those who are really foolish, they think themselves the doer of activities which are in actuality carried out by material nature, by the free modes of material nature. And so, in the second instruction, what the Lord Brahma is praying for here in this, the very last thing he's saying in his prayers is that he may not be deviated from the vibration of the Vedic hymns. So basically, you can understand he's asking the Lord to be able to always remember and follow the Lord's instructions, because we know the Vedas are coming from the Lord's briefing, so they're his instructions for the benefit of the living entities. Like, it's kind of like, it's like the user manual for the material world. That now, we already made the mistake of going into the material world, but then the Lord is so kind that he gives full instructions, not only how to immediately go back to Godhead by engaging in pure devotional service, but also all different kinds of levels, and to also get material happiness, and to slowly, gradually get purified following the Varnashrama Dharma, and or following Karma Kanda, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, all the different forms of yoga and processes of how to ultimately come back to Him and how to live properly here in the material world as well. And so, in terms of those instructions, this week I was reading the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where the Lord personally to Arjuna also very clearly explains about transcendental knowledge, about his own position, and how to understand it and how to get this knowledge. Like we know, initially he talks the first few verses about the parampara, how transcendental knowledge is imparted, how he himself first of all imparted it, also the same Bhagavad Gita, the science of yoga, the science of the relationship between the soul and the super soul, and which is Krishna. And then how, because previously we know, 3rd chapter he concluded, the last section of that is beware of lust and anger, so that the conditioned souls, they, even without their desiring it, as Arjuna points out to him, that many times they get to do things which they regret later, and that's due to being driven by lust or anger, which lust. When it doesn't get fulfilled, then it degrades into anger, from passion into ignorance. And so the flow is so that we know that then it is the role of those Raja Rishis, of saintly kings, to protect the citizens, not just physically, but also specifically to protect them from lust. And so that's why then Krishna gives this transcendental knowledge and explains to Arjuna how it is given. So, but not only that, we can just start the first few verses, famous ones, as we know. So first Krishna tells about how he had given it to the Raja Rishis. That's Imam vivasate yogam praktavana abhayam vivasvan manave praha manurikshvakave pravit. And then, so from that he gave it initially to Vivasvan, who gave it to his son Manu, who gave it to his son Ikshvaku, and from there it was present in the human society, but eventually get lost, as he explains in the next verse, and that's why he again is speaking it, or was speaking it 5,000 years to Arjuna. You know that Ivam parampara prabtam imam rajashayo viduho tsakalineha mahata yoga prashta yoga nashta parantapa. That it got lost by the influence of time, and that's why he's speaking it to Arjuna again. And then in the verse after that, Prabhupada explains that is also a very important verse, not as famous as the two verses previously, perhaps. I mean, they're all famous. But because it explains then what's the qualification actually for receiving such knowledge. And from that we understand that we don't have this qualification, and then come to that as Krishna explains that also further in the 4th chapter, then how do we get it? Because Krishna tells Arjuna that Saivayam ayatedya yoga prakta paratanaha bhaktosi me sakha cheti rahasyam yetat uttamam. That to understand Krishna, to understand devotional service is not a cheap thing. It's rahasyam yetat uttamam. It's the greatest mystery. And so, but I'm telling it to you, Arjuna, because you're my devotee, bhaktosi me sakha cheti, and my very dear friend. And obviously we know that we don't have this qualification, so how did we get it? He explains that in the famous verse later in 434. But so after giving the so Krishna first he sets up how this transcendental knowledge is given, how he originally gave it as well, and what's the qualification of it, and then he explains, of course, about his being eternal, Achopisana Vyayatma, and coming in his eternal transcendental body. And then, when does it come? Yada yada hitanamasya klani bhavata bharata. Then there's a decline in religion. And then, why does it come? To paritanaya sadhanam vinashaya chatushkatam, to protect the devotees especially, and also annihilate the miscreants, and re-establish religion. And then he tells also the consequence of how, if you understand Krishna as being this transcendental Supreme Personality of Godhead, that then that, and realizing that, then you won't have to take another material body, you'll go back to Godhead. And in the verse after that, so that's verse 9, and then verse 10, he concludes that section where he says further that, so understanding that it doesn't just mean theory, but it has the consequence of vitaraga bhaya krodha, that you are free from attachment, fear, and anger, and in that way you have love for him. And so and that in 11th verse is another famous verse where he explains then, okay, but how is it then that most people don't understand him, and so then what's their understanding, or what's their standing? So Krishna explains then that that's according to everyone's understanding, everyone's result of getting his interaction with Krishna is according to how he approaches Krishna, according to his surrender. That's yeyatamam prapatinte tam stateva pachamyaham. And so that's verse 11. And after that, then he basically mentions also many different forms of yajna, many different ways of sacrificing for him, and how yajna performing sacrifice, performing yaga leads to jnana, leads to transcendental knowledge. But still, then what does he say in 434? That Tatviti Prandipatina Pariprashnena Sevaya Upatikshanta Tekyanam Yanidas Tattvadarshinaha, that to actually really understand what sacrifice and really realize transcendental knowledge, you have to approach a spiritual master who can impart this knowledge unto you by your submissive attitude, by your service and inquiry. And so that's where we see that our only hope, especially, and for anyone to actually really understand Krishna, is only by the mercy of the spiritual master, by the mercy of the devotees. Like he also, I think it's the verse right after that, or soon after that, Krishna further explains then that because getting the knowledge in this way, imparted by the spiritual master, by pleasing him, then you actually really understand Krishna. Because understanding Krishna doesn't mean just to only knowing, okay, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, I believe in Krishna. Yes, that's a great start, but to really understand Krishna means to understand him and all his diverse energies, which includes all the living entities. So that's why Krishna says there that in 435, I believe, that such a person then sees that all living beings are but part of the Supreme, that they are mine. So a real devotee then realizes that everything is Krishna's energy, and thus including all the living entities, that they are all Krishna's parts and parcels. And this very topmost knowledge we can get simply by the mercy of the spiritual master. So we'll continue on that. I just want to say a few more points from the purport that Prabhupada tells, where I've lost the page. Where he mentions also that Lord Brahma being the supreme Brahmana, original Brahmana, and that he is thus praying that he may not fall down. So that Prabhupada explains Brahma wants to be protected by the Lord because he has to contact many, many vicious living entities, like I think Kamsai Sinapu yesterday mentioned also about how we know I can't remember where in Bhagavatam exactly that's mentioned, right? How those different living entities, like from his Brahma's, from his backside, come those demons, and who actually then even approach Lord Brahma to wanting to copulate with him and attacking him and things like that. So. And all of that is part of Lord Brahma's devotional service, to create even those kind of living entities. So quite a tricky service he has, and that's why he's praying here that he may be protected by even when coming in contact with those vicious living entities. So Prabhupada is saying that an ordinary Brahmana may fall from the Brahma Tejas, or the power of Brahminical excellence, due to his association with many fallen conditioned souls. Famous example, of course, we know in 6th canto of Ajamil how he was a nice Brahmana, and simply by seeing a prostitute embracing another man, that he got so degraded temporarily. Ultimately, of course, then by the mercy of the Vishnudutas, he became a pure devotee, chanting their holy name. And then okay, if it's quick. Yes. Well, why does he want him to create vicious living entities? Because the Lord Brahma is the secondary creator, so he. Because why does he want to create vicious living entities? Well, because it's, as we know, we're all spirit soul, but we all get situated in different material bodies and on different planets and under different circumstances according to our karma. So the Lord, He in that way always respects our free will, of how we misuse the free will. And so for some they have to be in such bodies, so Lord Brahma has to create it. Because, whether that's like basically the question, why does the Lord create any bad things, right? But yeah, that's it's our choice. Otherwise, in one way, it's also His mercy of how that the material world is not all happy, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to more easily realize our constitutional position, and only in our constitutional position as His servant, directly His servant as we are originally Satchidananda Vigraha, so we have the spirit soul is full of knowledge, bliss and eternal, but that quality is only exhibited if we are under the spiritual energy where we should be, which when we serve Krishna. So if we don't do that, then we under the material energy, then we are subject to the three modes. And the three modes, the goodness, passion and ignorance. If you're under passion and ignorance, then you may become a vicious living entity temporarily, but ultimately the Lord does so much to rectify us and to realize our spiritual position, which is completely beyond whether materially good or bad, whether pious or vicious. So, I hope that helps. So that's why then Lord Brahma, as Prabhupada elaborates here, is praying for this protection of, like beautiful Prabhupada is saying again, of his protection against the onslaught of material affection. And so, because obviously we know, protection, we can't protect ourselves. There's obviously no way in terms of the material body, no matter how athletic we are or great muscles we are. That's easy to understand for someone who has little intelligence, that with the gross body you can't protect your real ultimate spiritual identity. And even with the subtle body, even because one might say, but think that still, if I study very nicely the Vedas, like Brahma is mentioning here about not to get deviated from them, the Lord's instructions, then with his intelligence, then he can protect himself. But no, like Krishna points that out also in Bhagavad Gita about that the senses are so strong and impetuous that even a man of discrimination can very easily get overcome by them, can be attacked by lust and anger. So, and rather, we mentioned that previously also about Lord Brahma himself instructs Priyavrata Maharaj about how to really be protected, being surrounded by material facilities, so where you could very easily get attacked by material affection, as Prabhupada says it here. Like in case of Priyavrata Maharaj, he was such a great king then that he had like practically unlimited material facilities. But Lord Brahma told him, blessed him, that he will be protected by the lotus petals of the feet of the Lord. So by taking shelter of the Lord's lotus feet, in other words, like Prabhupada explained there in the 5th canto that this lotus, because generally of lotus feet, lotus stands for beauty, so as together give us some idea that the Lord's feet are not the most beautiful, and it's lotus eyes and everything of the Lord is most beautiful, obviously. So, but lotus feet also, it indicates, as we learn from that it's gives us full protection. Just as when a bee enters a lotus flower, the lotus petals protect the bee from any surrounding external disturbances. It can peacefully simply relish the nectar of the lotus flower. So in the same way, the devotees can peacefully be fully absorbed in relishing the nectar of the Lord's lotus feet, even though externally they might be subjected to so many disturbances. And but to get to those lotus feet, like we had it previously also, where Prabhupada quotes in one of those purports the 3 verses of Prahlad Maharaj's prayers to Lord Nrsingadev, where Prahlad Maharaj points out that people, they are not able to turn their attention to the Lord's lotus feet unless and until they get the dust of the lotus feet of the devotees. Naisham matistavaturukramangrim. They can't turn their attention to those lotus feet. But those lotus feet are what the only protection, the only remedy for anyone. Sprishatyanartabhogamo yadartaha. Because the result of coming in contact with the Lord's lotus feet that is that our anarthas are destroyed. And that's why that comes back again to, one has to take shelter of the devotees, and like Prabhupada in that property translated this verse as not as what it literally means, the Mahat Padaracho Abhishekam, that one has to bathe in the dust of the lotus feet of the devotees, but he directly translated it there into that one has to follow the instructions of the devotees. Because, as pointed out, it doesn't mean that you go around taking dust from the shoes of the devotees, but rather it means that you submissively follow your spiritual master's instructions and of the senior devotees. And also Krishna points out in Gita many times that following his instructions or engaging in devotional service doesn't mean that you have to perfectly always be able to execute your duties in terms of like getting the result that you desire, but rather, again, coming back to the point, you have to understand that you are not the doer. From our side, we try to follow the instructions in the best way, but then the result is up to the Lord. And in that way, like Ganesh Prabhu many times he says that how we see success might not be the way of how Krishna sees it. Because how does he see success? He sees our sincerity of how we endeavor to try to please him. Whereas we, many times with our material vision, might be after some visible results that we get from our activities. But whether those results are given or not, that's up to Krishna. That's not in our control, and that shouldn't be our anxiety. Our anxiety should only be to please the Lord. Like one famous verse, of course, where in 3rd chapter also, where he explains that is Kramani vadikaraste ma palesha kadachana ma karma palahetur bhuva mati sangastu karmani. That when we do our duty, that we should understand that not only should we not claim credit of the result that we get of the activity, but also we should understand that we are not the actual cause of the result, and at the same time we shouldn't give up our duty. So we should, in other words, we should always simply surrender to the Lord in trying to execute the duty to our best ability. And that itself is actually the perfection, like I mentioned in last time about how Prabhupada is quoting the Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur about this famous, it's in Bhagavatam, of the section of the Prachetas, and how they follow Lord Shiva's instructions, but it's Prabhupada is quoting there the famous verse of what he himself said that inspired him so much of Vyavyasa Yatmika Buddhyareka Kuru Nandana, that this single-pointed attention of following the spiritual master's instructions, which Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains as that it should be the very life substance of the disciple, the spiritual master's instructions, where Prabhupada explains there that this is, and so simply to meditate on the instructions of the spiritual master, that is the perfection of meditation, not necessarily to, like the Ashtanga yogis, to simply only meditate on the Lord as in the form of the super soul, but more importantly is to get the Lord's devotee's mercy, to get the spiritual master's mercy, and for that to take his instructions as our life and soul and meditate on those, how to execute them. So in other words, again, we see to simply to try to execute sincerely those instructions, that is our perfection. But even to do that, we need mercy. That's why Lord Brahma is praying like that in those last 2 concluding verses, that he may never falsely take credit, and that he may always remember the Lord's instructions, the Vedic hymns. But even like Vedic hymns, also we know that, like Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita also to Arjuna, that the Vedas, when you just simply read the Vedas without guidance, then you can get bewildered very easily as well, because there's mostly, we know it's on Karma Kanda. It's Pushpitam Vacham, the flowery language of the Vedas, of promising elevation to heavenly planets, drinking Soma Ras, and those kind of things. And so, and that's why when Bharat Maharaj, it's explained that Shukadeva Goswami explains that at the very end of telling about Bharat Maharaj's pastimes, and where he, in the last chapter, where he elaborates again on the forest of material enjoyment, which Jad Bharat Maharaj in his third birth, as Jad Bharat had explained to Maharaj Rahugana. So there at the end, Shukadeva Goswami explains how Bharat Maharaj in his second birth as a deer, famously, as we know, that how he prayed to the Lord. And in this prayer, one word that Bharat Maharaj is addressing the Lord as is Vidhi Naipunaya, which means who gives the devotees the intelligence to follow the regulative principles expertly. In other words, that he is the protector of religious systems. So, which again shows that to act, even the Lord's instructions as the Vedas are there, but to understand them, we need the Lord's mercy, we need the devotees' mercy, otherwise we so easily get confused. For example, I was even in Bhagavad Gita itself, when I read that recently, like this week, I was reading third and fourth chapter. So in the third chapter, at one point, Krishna, where he explains about karma kanda, like how we are dependent on the demigods' supply of basic necessities, and so that you need to worship them. And in one verse he says, when by pleasing the demigods, they will please you. So when I read that, I was thinking, oh wow, that sounds actually like Krishna is glorifying prosperity of the religion, right? You just, please the demigods, not even Krishna himself, and they will please you, whatever you want, whatever material desires you have. So, but obviously that's not the point that Krishna wants to make. He's just giving the basic system also of how the material world works, namely like Anat Bhavanti Bhutani and so on, giving the whole cycle that the living entities subsist on food grains, and which come from rain, and they depend on yagyas, so that the demigods would supply them the rain and sun and everything properly, and that is prescribed in the amongst the karma, the duties which are prescribed in the Vedas. So, but yeah, obviously the point that Krishna is making is not that you should worship the demigods to fulfill your material desires, but it is because he gives it in the context, like before that he tells one famous verse, Yagyartat karmano yatra, that Yagyam, the purpose is to please Vishnu. And so, yeah, but still, just by reading it like that, even Krishna's personal instructions in Bhagavad Gita could confuse us if we don't see it through the lens of the spiritual master, through Srila Prabhupada's purpose also. And obviously even Arjuna himself expresses in Bhagavad Gita twice how he gets confused by the Lord's, he even tells to Krishna by equivocal instructions. So, and like that's in beginning of third chapter and beginning of fifth chapter, like very similar, where he basically, obviously he does it for our benefit, because Prabhupada elaborates there also that people have the tendency of thinking of spiritual life as being simply giving up all material activities, such as going to a secluded place and chant or whatever. And obviously our acharyas and Srila Prabhupada condemned it so many times, because out of their compassion, knowing that in previous ages there is a process like that also for those who can follow it properly, then slowly they can also get purified and ultimately come to bhakti if they then get the mercy of a devotee. But in this age especially, it's not at all suitable, because as we know, our real enemy is our mind, which is contaminated by all those countless material lives that we had. So, Arjuna places himself there as being bewildered of, why do you glorify knowledge, you glorify spiritual intelligence, that you have, in that way you have to conquer lust by deliberate spiritual intelligence, for example, at the end of third chapter. But then how. But then at the same time, you tell me that I should fight, which seems like a material activity. But obviously, it's in Gita itself is explained that no, it's because simply to follow Krishna's instructions. That's real spiritual life. And one more point I was thinking of in terms of taking Lord Brahma praying about not taking credit. I read it recently when also in the end of of Bharat Maharaj's section in 5th canto, where in one, actually it's in the famous verse where Shukadeva Goswami glorifies Maharaj Parikshit's renunciation as in his first life already as the great king Bharat Maharaj, where he says, Yudhustha Chandra Sultan Suritrajyam Ridis Sprishaha Chahau Yuvaiva Malavat Uttama Lalasaha, that he gave up all this great kingdom, his beautiful wife, and all those material facilities, just like one leaves behind his stool after passing it. So this verse very graphically explaining how detached a pure devotee is, and that's because Uttama Shloka Lalasaha, because he was fully attracted to the Lord, to Uttama Shloka. And there Srila Prabhupada explains about one translation of Uttama Shloka, as he is saying that Uttama means best and Shloka means reputation. And then Prabhupada is elaborating on this, that the Lord is full in those 6 opulences. And at one point Prabhupada is saying that Krishna's reputation is still expanding. And then Prabhupada is saying, we are spreading the glories of Krishna by pushing forward the Krishna conscious movement. And similar in that way he tells that a few times there. And when I was reading that, I was thinking, oh wow, that looks obviously we know it's not like that, but it looks like Srila Prabhupada is claiming credit that actually Krishna's fame is depending on ISKCON, on Srila Prabhupada and his disciples to spread his fame. Otherwise he's not as famous as he could be. And but obviously, we know how Srila Prabhupada's extreme humility and never taking any credit, but always knowing himself and presenting himself as his surrendered servant of his spiritual master, and in this way ultimately of Krishna. But like Bhavi Bhushanpur was recently explaining how that's one of those bewildering things if you are not a devotee, especially that pure devotees, on the one hand, they are extremely humble, feel themselves utterly helplessly dependent on the Lord, and at the same time they're extremely confident as well, knowing the Lord's mercy and the Lord's potency, and in that way how strongly they can preach. And like Prabhupada, even to the extent that he's saying here that yes, this Krishna conscious movement is we're spreading Krishna's fame. And in terms of Lord Brahma not praying not to get bewildered of taking credit for his activities, obviously for him it's very graphic of how easily he could get bewildered, because after all he's the secondary creator, so he's the creator of this whole universe. But like Prabhupada in Ishopanishad, for example, also at the beginning he explains of analogies of how we can very easily understand that because the Lord's being the supreme proprietor of everything, Ishavasya idam sarvam, that therefore simply knowing that alone, actually we should never take any credit, because then even the greatest creations that we make, what to speak of Lord Brahma creating the whole universe, that actually we are only molding the Lord's energy, like using it, is the material that the Lord is providing. Just as when a builder is engaged by a rich person to build a whole house, this doesn't mean that the builder can claim proprietorship over the house just because he built it, but rather he gets paid for that service, but it's the property of the actual owner of the house. Or just as a gardener might be engaged to plant so many flowers, but this doesn't mean that then he can claim proprietorship of them. To conclude with that, even on this word gardener, that even Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself presents himself as a gardener of the fruit of love of Godhead, but he very humbly takes the position, exclaims that, well, but I'm just one small gardener, how many fruits can I distribute? And that's why he's appealing to everyone to help him distribute this fruit of love of Godhead. And as he says, Yarate Katarike Krishna Patesha Maragnana Guru Hanai Desh, that's his main instruction to all of us, to give Krishna consciousness to everyone as much as you can. And that's because Prabhupada in the Purpati points out of that therefore one has to pray constantly to the Lord for protection and the blessing to carry out one's duty. Lord Chaitanya also entrusted his missionary work to his devotees and assured them of his protection against the onslaught of material affection. So to be really protected against that, then we simply need to sincerely carry out the Lord's instructions, which come to us through our spiritual master, through the Parampara, and of course always still never think, yes, we by our ability we can do it. No, the pure devotees, they still always know themselves utterly helplessly dependent on the Lord, so they always pray to the Lord for being able to simply try to execute His orders, which is our perfection. Okay, so I'll conclude here if there's any comment or question. Okay. Krantara Chimapakram Kecha, Srila Prabhupada Kecha.